are going to be, look at these great moments in my life. Look at all of these things that I'm proud of. So what happens to us if we're scrolling through constantly, everybody posting the greatest things, and then there's that political thing I need to worry about. So I'm going between envy and fear and envy and fear. Is it hard for you to admit that you struggle with envy? I think it's easier to admit if we struggle with anger, because that at least means that I was a victim of something. I mean, that car driver was really stupid, or that person didn't make my food the right way. So if I say that I'm angry, that means somebody did something wrong against me. But if I admit to envy, that's all on me. And so this scene in 1 Samuel chapter 18 is right after David has killed Goliath. And you can imagine these people coming back from the battle. And this is where we're at in 1 Samuel 18. I'm going to start by reading verses 5 through 16, and then we're going to come back later and look at the first 4 verses. But look at 1 Samuel 18, starting in verse 5. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, notice this, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Now, as I keep reading through this, notice the moments where Saul's self-talk is revealed. The things that he's saying in his heart. Look at verse 8. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. As he did day by day, Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall, but David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. The first thing that I want us to do as we think about this scene here is what is going on in Saul's heart? What is this envy that he's experiencing? And I think we can observe a couple things that this means for him. Number one, he's comparing himself to David. Notice in this scene, all the women from all the cities of Israel, and I pointed this out as I was reading this, they were coming out to meet Saul. It's not like they're all just ignoring Saul and then going straight to David. They're actually coming out to meet Saul. You're the king. You're the reason in our minds maybe we have success in the nation or something like that. And they're coming to meet Saul saying, David has done great things and Saul has done great things as well. And what's Saul's reaction to that? He said in verse 8, they have ascribed to me thousands and to David 10,000. Notice this language in this text. To David, to me. To David, to me. One part of being an envious person is that you can't hear anything about somebody else's successes and not immediately start thinking about yourself. To David, to me. Is it appropriate, though, at times to compare yourself to somebody else? We just looked at the book of Philippians. Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, verse 9, what you've heard and seen and learned in me, practice these things and the God of peace will be with you. There's times to compare yourself to somebody else so that you can imitate them as they imitate Christ. So it's not just comparing. It's comparing and then coveting. Look at in verse 9 where it says that Saul eyed David. What does it mean to eye somebody? If somebody says, oh, I've been eyeing that Cybertruck or something. I really would like to get one of those one day. It's something that I'm highly desirous of. Saul is comparing himself to David, and then he's eyeing David. I wish that his life was my life. I wish that I had the things that he had. What specifically are the things that he would be eyeing in David's life, though? Notice how the text begins and ends. In verse 5 and in verse 14, David has all these great military victories, starting with killing Goliath. Notice also, though, in verse 10, what else is David good at in this passage? He can even play, he can play instruments and apparently do it pretty well. Have you ever known somebody that was just good at everything and you hated that person? They could like ride on a ripstick, but they could also make they could cook really good, and they were really smart. And it's just like every time you're around the person, you just hate yourself all the more. David it didn't matter what he did. He was just really successful. Do you think that's part of what Saul was eyeing? If they were friends on Facebook, do you think Saul would have kept checking out what was going on in David's life? Because he wanted to know what's he up to now? It's not just his successes, but also the praise. Everybody else is acknowledging these things about him. All Israel loves him in verse 16. Have you ever heard somebody else praise somebody else, and because you're a Christian, you're supposed to go, yeah, that person's really great, but it's really hard to say that. And you know that it's like the Christian thing to say, but it hurts you to have to try to acknowledge that because you're comparing and then coveting. Envious. I wish their life was my life. Have you ever heard people say that in the Old Testament law, God was not concerned as much with the heart, and then in the New Testament, God's more concerned with the heart? What's the last of the 10 commandments? It's this very thing. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, or anything that is your neighbor's. Have you ever gone to somebody else's house and gone, oh, high ceilings, high doors, nice, I'm really happy for you, and inwardly you knew it wasn't the case? Or have you ever looked at somebody else's wife? Or we can broaden this out and say husband or children, and gone, how come I don't have that kind of family? How come I don't have that? Or just anything else that's your neighbor's. Like back then, somebody has a tricked out donkey that they can ride to different places with NOS. Today it's the Cybertruck. But you look at somebody else and you go, how come I don't have any? It's not fair that I don't have any of those things. So to have envy is not to compare and then be encouraged. It's not to compare and then be happy. It's to compare and then covet. If this is going on in somebody's heart, what kinds of impacts would this make on the person? And we can think about this from two different perspectives. We can think, first of all, what's going on within Saul's heart beyond the things that we've already talked about? The internal impacts of what's going on with Saul, first of all, you notice in verses 8, 12, 15, there's like a kaleidoscope of emotions. Anger, displeasure, fear, all these different things. Andy just talked about things that could rob people of their joy by fixating on their circumstances. What's Saul's circumstances? Well, you are the king. People are trying to praise you. But because of this envy going on in your heart, all the things that you could rejoice in are stealing all of the joy that you have. And we talk about how that can ruin our evangelistic opportunities. This is going to bring lots of disruption to the whole nation. Now, with pretty much every sin, there is momentary pleasure. That's why people commit sin. What is the momentary pleasure of envy? Maybe it's the case that when you find yourself to be better than somebody else, now I'm on the winning side, but through and through, envy is just rotten. And so he's got all of these different emotions going on, but notice what else is going on within him. Notice how he talks about the self-talk in verse 8, when he says about David, what more can he have but the kingdom? It's like he's paranoid. And David, by the way, is going to have the kingdom, but that self-talk shows what is it that he takes pride in? Having the throne. What kind of people do you feel the most threatened by? It's the people that excel at the things that you take pride in. So, for example, if you take pride in your self-worth and the way that you like to define yourself has a lot to do with your intellect, you're going to feel really good being around people who are stupid. but you're going to feel really bad around people that are smarter than you. If you take a lot of pride in your beauty, you're going to find a lot of joy being around people who you think are uglier than you. But around people that are more fit than you or more beautiful than you, you're going to feel like a wreck. You can do the same exercise with success or power, anything like that. So that's maybe one diagnostic thing that you could think about. Who are the people I feel most threatened by? And does that say something about my kind of envy? Notice another thing that's going on, though, with Saul is that all these things going on in his heart just keep getting worse. I'm not going to say all the things that we could say about this, but God lets this harmful spirit come upon him. And how can God do that? And I'm not going to deal with all of that right now. But what is this saying? That if you let this in your heart, it's not going to naturally get better. You remember the first time you ever said something you shouldn't have said, or the first time you ever committed some sin that you were breaking your conscience to do it, and that was the hardest time it was ever to do it, and you did it one time knowing that you were going to do that, and then 6 months later you start realizing that the sin is like committing me now. It's controlling me. Saul is in this place where this is just getting worse and worse and worse because he's leaving it unchecked. If you were to see that there was some kind of a roof leak in your house, like every time it rains, there's water getting into the house, is that just naturally going to get better? It's going to ruin the joists. It's going to ruin the floor. It's going to ruin everything. Or you could think about it this way too. We have a house on 5 acres in Bowling Green, and my wife, she's good at keeping our kids alive, but she's not good at keeping plants alive. And she says that. In the backyard, the only kind of thing that grows when you're unintentional in leaving things alone are like thorns and thistles and weeds. If you want something to grow that's going to be beautiful, you actually have to put work in it. So if Saul's leaving this alone, it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Have you ever seen somebody who was a little bit more seasoned, like Brent said at lunch, the seasoned citizens, and they've never done anything to control their envy? And then they're just left an old, angry, bitter, envious kind of person. If you have this in your heart and you're not doing anything about it, it's not going to get better. But you can't have this going on in your heart without it eventually leaking out. So what are the external impacts of what's going on with Saul? I think one of the things that we see is he's starting to hurl spears at David. Do you notice in verse 11 where he says, I will pin David to the wall? Notice also in verse 11, David evaded him twice. Can you imagine if you go to work and you work at the Valvoline or something, and your boss tries to chuck a spear at you, and you go, can I check out early today? And he's like, yeah, that's fine. I'm sorry about what I did. Would you go the next day? And then in chapter 19, it happens again. And so Saul just keeps chucking. What would this look like? Have you ever chucked a spear at somebody? Look at Psalm 57. In Psalm 57, and by the way, if you were to look at the superscription of this psalm, this is one of the ones that David wrote when he fled from Saul. And so it says this in Psalm 57, verse 4, my soul is in the midst of lions. I lie down amid fiery beasts, the children of man, whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Let me ask the question again. Have you ever chucked a spear at somebody? You know those times where you've kind of built up some resentment for somebody and you're envious of this person, and then you just said a kind of barbed comment, and they're like, hey, what did you mean by that? And you go, I was just joking. But you know that you weren't actually just joking. Notice the other thing. There's isolation. Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. Why do you think Saul wants David to go out and fight all these battles? I think verse 18 answers the question. Look at verse 18. Then Saul said to David, here is my elder daughter Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, notice his self-talk again, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. I don't want to have to kill. I tried to do it. The Spirit didn't work. So maybe the Philistines can go ahead and do that. So he's sending him out to battle. Have you ever isolated yourself from somebody because of your envy of them? I'm going to block them on social media so that I don't have to keep seeing all the great things that are happening in their life. I kind of wish that they would move out of the country. I wouldn't kill them, but if they died, it sure wouldn't bother me too much. Do you think human beings ever feel these kinds of things? How many of us look at these kinds of things, and if we're really honest about it, go, you know what? I don't know that I'm just totally free and clear of something like envy. You ever noticed in 2 Timothy chapter 4, James chapter 1 does the same thing, that Timothy is told to preach the word in season and out of season, for there's coming a time where people will not what? Endure sound doctrine. Or in James chapter 1, the person that looks at the mirror, the perfect law of liberty, and perseveres. Endurance and perseverance. In what contexts do you use those words? Like eating healthy, working out, doing things that are difficult? The scripture is something that we have to endure. The scripture is something that we have to persevere in. You look at things like this and you go, this sounds like my life sometimes. How do you conquer this kind of envy? And maybe we could ask it from this perspective. If you could sit down with Saul and give him some advice, what would be some of the things that you would say to him? Maybe going back to the idea of Philippians, how about, Saul, you learn to meditate on your blessings? You are the king of Israel. Goliath was a big threat, and he was just taken away. The women are still praising you. There's a lot of things that you can rejoice in, but because of your mindset and you're thinking about the wrong, so maybe that would be some of the advice we give him. What about developing like a teamwork mindset? Do you remember, Saul, when you did the relay races in high school and everybody had to do the batons and everything, and the success of one contributed to the success of all? Why can't you think that way, Saul? Maybe that'd be part of what you'd say. Maybe you'd give him 2 Corinthians 4:18, even though it wouldn't be there yet. We look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. How many of the kinds of things we get envious of are eternal things? It's somebody's house, somebody's car, it's somebody's family, it's somebody's $3,000 Armani suit, it's all these things that are going to pass away. Have you ever heard the phrase before that there are no U-Hauls behind hearses? Pharaoh was wrong. Maybe that would be some of the advice that we would give Saul. But we didn't read the first 4 verses of this chapter yet. And a lot of the times what's going on when people preach on Saul and Jonathan and then Jonathan's relationship to David is we look at this and we say, this is what true friendship is. And I think that's right. But sometimes we might isolate those first 4 verses and miss that Jonathan is a counterexample to Saul. Look at the first 4 verses of chapter 18. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword and bow and his belt. 2 times in this text, Jonathan loves David as his own soul. Is he envious of David? No, let me just say it bluntly in this way. If we struggle with envy, we struggle with loving people. There's a lot of ways in which the opposite of envy is to love people. And that's the counter here, that this man loves him as his own soul. What's the evidence in this text that that's what he's doing? You notice he gives him his attire. He gives him his robe, his armor, and his belt. All right, in this culture, who's the heir to the throne? Jonathan is. Who's got the most skin in the game with regards to what's going on with David? Jonathan does. I'm supposed to be the next king. And instead of killing him, he makes a covenant with him and gives him his attire, his robe, his armor, and his belt. would this have been like princely materials here? Notice what else he gives him, his weapons. He gives him his sword and his bow. No, I'm sorry, Jonathan, you're supposed to take your sword and thrust it into David's belly. You're supposed to take your sword and shoot him, or your bow and shoot him in the head with it. But instead, why are you doing this? There's two kinds of relationships you can have with people. There's some people that will be users of you and just extract whatever they can get from you. And there's other people who will have a covenant kind of relationship with you, where they will love you as their own soul. Have you ever had somebody who you thought you were close to, and as soon as you had to challenge them about something, they just dropped you? As soon as you did something that they didn't like and they weren't even willing to talk it through with you? What does it mean to love somebody as your own soul? Imagine that you're single and you really want to be married, and your best friend gets engaged, and you're going to be at their wedding. What would loving them as your own soul mean? I'm going to be just as happy for you as if it were for me. What if you were really envious of, or there's somebody at work and they got the promotion that you really wanted? You could either be envious, or you could love them as your own soul and be just as happy for them as if it were you. This is what Jonathan is doing. David, I see what God is doing with you. Culturally, this should be my role, but God is giving it to you, and I'm just as happy for you as if it would have been for me. That's one of the high callings of love. Do you wish that you had a friend like that? Maybe some of you do on earth, but the Bible, I think, would show that all of us have a friend like this in Jesus. We oftentimes look at stories of David and look at how David is like Jesus. In this scene, it's kind of like Jonathan is like Jesus, where Jonathan emptied himself for David. And Jonathan loved David as his own soul. Does that sound like Christ so far? And then Jonathan clothed David with his clothing. Does that sound like something else that Jesus did as well? Galatians chapter 3, verse 27, you are all sons of God through faith, for as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. He's willing to clothe us with himself. 2 times David had to evade Saul. Tries to pin him against the wall, and David escapes. In the New Testament, Jesus doesn't evade being pinned to the cross. What's the reason that he was pinned to the cross? Mark 15, verse 10, for he perceived, that's Pilate, that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. David wasn't pinned to the wall, but Jesus was pinned to the cross. And he emptied himself so that we could be filled by his love. And if we let that love come into our hearts and transform us so that we can start loving other people the same way, we'll start to understand what it means to overcome the envy in our own hearts. The question is whether or not we're choosing to meditate on those things. We're about to sing this song, Just as I am, I come broken. If there's anybody here tonight that has been broken by their sin, this is an opportunity to get their life right. You're filled right now in a room with people that would sacrifice their time and their energy to talk with you. You have the option of either coming forward while we stand and sing or talking to somebody before you leave.